there's a 20-mile wide sliver of water between Iran and Oman. And right now, almost nothing is moving through it. This is the reason your gas got expensive this year. So on any normal day, 1/5 of the oil on Earth passes through it, 20% of the world's natural gas too, and right now it's running at about 5%. Here's the story of how a narrow channel between two countries became the most important sliver of water on the planet, and what just happened to it in the spring of 2026. So to get us started, the Strait of Hormuz sits at the southern end of the Persian Gulf. It is the only sea route connecting that Gulf to the open ocean. If you want to ship oil from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran, any of those places, this is the door you got to walk through. At its narrowest point, the strait is just 20 miles across. For comparison, that's roughly the width of Greater London or the drive from Manhattan to Newark Airport, question mark. It's pretty small, I mean. But the ships, they can't really use the full 20 miles of everything. There's a designated shipping lane, 2 miles wide for inbound traffic, 2 miles wide for outbound traffic, with a 2-mile buffer between them. So 6 miles in total. That water is deep enough though, about 200 to 330 feet across most of the strait. Plenty for the giant super tankers that haul the crude oil across the planet. But most of these shipping lanes sit inside Omani territorial waters. Some sit inside Iranian waters. International maritime law guarantees the right of innocent passage, but the geography places the strait right at Iran's southern doorstep. So, on a normal day, about 20 million barrels of oil move through the strait, plus around 20% of the planet's liquefied natural gas. And roughly speaking, every fifth tank of gas in the world has started in this strait. And most Americans rarely think about the Strait of Hormuz because U.S. oil is now produced domestically. But Asia, especially Asia, runs on it. South Korea, Japan, India, and above all, China. Americans really don't think about this at all. So China receives almost 38% of the oil that passes through the strait, more than any country in the world, and about 45% of China's seaborne imports come through that strait, that 20-mile gap. So here's the thing about oil though, it's a global market. If the strait closes, China can't really replicate what it loses. China bids up oil from other sources get more expensive, making your gas price go up. So in January 2026, Brent crude oil was sitting around $61 a barrel. That's a pretty fairly normal price for the past 3 years. Markets are quiet, and the strait was operating normally. No headlines. But by February, just the rising risk of conflict had pushed it to 72. That's the strait acting up before anything bad even happened, purely just based on risk. And on February 28th, 2026, the U.S. and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes against Iran. The war that had been threatened for years was suddenly real, and this first cruise missile flew before sunrise. Iran responded with its most strategic lever, the Strait of Hormuz. Within weeks, the transit through the strait had collapsed from 20 million barrels a day to a thin trickle. Iran responded with its most strategic lever, the Strait of Hormuz. Within weeks, transit through the strait had collapsed from 20 million barrels a day to a thin trickle. Iran did not officially close the strait. Closing it outright would be illegal under international maritime law, but instead Iran did 3 quieter things that worked just as well. First, missile and drone strikes on commercial ships. Second, declaring a new Persian Gulf Strait Authority that ships had to register with. And third, simply making the strait so dangerous that insurers refuse to cover transits going through. So on May 5th, a French-owned container ship called the CMA San Antonio was struck by a cruise missile. 8 crew members were injured, and ships across the world started nervously looking at their schedules. So within weeks, Maersk suspended transits, CMA suspended transits, Hapag-Lloyd the same. The world's biggest container shippers all decided that the strait was, for now, not worth crossing. And by mid-May, about 1,550 vessels were stranded inside or just outside the Persian Gulf. Around 22,000 mariners were stuck on the ships, and some have been waiting over a month. Oil prices reacted the exact way you'd expect. By April, Brent crude oil hit $138 a barrel, nearly double where it started earlier in the year. Gas prices climbed sharply across the whole U.S., and Saudi Arabia saw this risk coming decades ago. The United Arab Emirates saw it more recently. Both countries built oil pipelines specifically designed to bypass the strait, a backdoor in case that front door is ever closed. Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline runs 745 miles from its eastern oil fields to the Red Sea. It can carry 7 million barrels of oil a day, a backup in case the strait ever fails. The UAE has its own pipeline. It runs 235 miles from oil fields near Abu Dhabi to the port of Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman side. It carries another 1.8 million barrels a day. Now, it sounds like a lot, but remember, the strait normally moves around 20 million barrels a day, so the Saudi and UAE pipelines together can only replace about 9 million of those barrels, less than half of them. None of this is new, by the way. This isn't the first time the Strait of Hormuz has ever become a global crisis. It happens roughly every 30 years. In the 80s, during the Iran-Iraq war, both countries started attacking each other's oil tankers in the Persian Gulf, and it became known as the Tanker War. So from 1983 to 86, the attacks got worse every year. By late 1986, Kuwait was so desperate to keep its tankers moving that it asked the U.S. to let them sail under the U.S. flag. The U.S. agreed, and then the U.S. Navy started escorting them through the strait. On April 14, 1988, a U.S. Navy frigate called the USS Samuel B. Roberts struck an Iranian mine inside the strait. The blast nearly sank the ship, but the crew saved it. 0 deaths. And 4 days later, the U.S. retaliated. It was called Operation Praying Mantis. And one day, the U.S. Navy sank 2 Iranian ships, destroyed 2 Iranian oil platforms, and it remains the largest U.S. naval surface battle since World War II. Then everything calmed down. The strait reopened, prices settled, the world quietly went back to depending on the same 20-mile sliver of water as if nothing happened. Which brings us back to right now. On May 28, 2026, the U.S. and Iran announced they had reached a tentative agreement to begin ending the war. The strait might open again. The agreement would lift the constraints on the Strait of Hormuz. It would also start a 60-day negotiation about Iran's nuclear program. It's not signed yet. As of late May, the U.S. president has not currently finalized it. But the oil market believed the news instantly. Brent crude dropped from $117 in April down to $91 by late May. So a 17% decline in a single month, the steepest drop since COVID. On May 29th, the U.S. Defense Secretary said the American military was, quote, ready to resume combat if needed. Translation, the peace deal is not signed yet and no one has put away any of their missiles. And as of the moment this is being recorded, the strait is technically reopening. Iran has said vessels will be allowed through after registering with its new maritime authority. Insurers are nervous, shippers are nervous. Some ships are starting to move though again, very slowly. Many are still waiting to see if the deal holds before risking $1 billion tanker on it. And in the background, the UAE quietly fast-tracked a second pipeline. In the background, the UAE quietly fast-tracked a second oil pipeline to bypass the strait in mid-May. They are not waiting around to see what happens when the next tensions rise. And this is the pattern of the Strait of Hormuz. Tensions rise, markets panic, pipelines get fast-tracked. This is the pattern of the Strait of Hormuz. Tensions rise, markets panic, pipelines get fast-tracked. Eventually, the crisis ends and everyone slowly forgets until the next one. The country with the most to lose from a permanently closed strait is by far China. Roughly 45% of its seaborne oil imports flow through it, far more than the U.S. has ever had. The United States is, ironically, the country most able to weather the closed strait. American domestic oil now covers most of American demand, but global oil prices always affect every gas pump on Earth. The strait itself is not going anywhere. The geography is fixed. The Persian Gulf has exactly one outlet to the sea. Until someone invents a new ocean, that outlet will always matter. Every supertanker that wants to leave the Gulf has to pass through 20 miles of water that two countries can plausibly patrol. That, in a sentence, is what a choke point is. 20 miles, 20% of the world's oil, 20% of its natural gas, one tiny passage. And every time politics get bad in the region, the entire global economy reaches for its wallet. Some places matter because of what is in them. Some places matter because of where they are. The Strait of Hormuz, by accident of geography, will probably matter as long as there are oil tankers.